from the Friday episode of the Dog and Bandits. I'm Orrin Phillips, and today we have graphic novelist Jonah Newman. Jonah has a book out there called Out of Left Field, and it's about pretty much his experience growing up as a gay high schooler on a baseball team and figuring out who he was. You'll find out that it's not all totally autobiographical. Some stuff he did kind of make a story into itself, but it's a wonderful, wonderful read. I highly recommend checking it out. And Jonah knows a lot about graphic novels because he gets to work with Dav Pilkey of the Dog Man series. We talk about that as well. Jonah is a huge baseball fan, just like me. So we get into a little baseball. So if you're not a baseball fan, I apologize. We talk a little bit about the Hall of Fame, but it is what it is, folks. It's our show, so we do what we like. And we like Jonah a lot. So without further ado, Jonah Newman. Jonah, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you so much for having me.
So let's start at the very beginning. How did you first discover comics?
Um, I think my first experience with comics was with the strips in the Sunday paper. The color comics like what are some of my favorites like Zitz and Doonesbury and Family Circus and all that stuff. So the first comics I made were similar to that. They were single strip, 3, 4 panels, a gag at the end.
Hmm.
And those are the sort of comics I made through middle school. But in high school, I discovered graphic novels, and the graphic novels that I read first were sort of the holy trinity that many people get into graphic novels through. And by that I mean Fun Home, Mouse, and Persepolis.
Hmm.
So I read those books as a teenager, and they kind of opened my mind to the graphic novel format, and I really fell in love with long form comic storytelling, and the richness and depth of that format really struck me. So when I got back into making comics in college, I dove right in and went for the big one and decided, I'm going to transition from single strips to a ginormous graphic novel and just give that a go. So I was never much of a superhero comics person. Really, it was graphic novels that lit me up the most, and so it's graphic novels now that occupy my professional energy.
I was going to say, was it in college that you said, you know what, this is a profession or this might be a path that I want to pursue as a career?
It was really more after college, to be honest. In college, I thought I wanted to work in sports and specifically in baseball. So I did internships, and my first job out of college was actually at Major League Baseball Advanced Media.
Wow.
But I was making this graphic novel on the side, and I started to realize that that was really what I cared the most about, and that's what I was enjoying the most. So then I started to explore the world of publishing, and I realized, oh, there are jobs in graphic novel publishing. I could work at a publisher. So I made that career pivot, and now work at Scholastic at the graphics imprint. And I've been at Scholastic now for 5.5 years, so it's the only place I've worked in publishing. And meanwhile, still continued pursuing my own craft as an author illustrator.
Now, before we talk about the book, you mentioned you're a baseball fan. We're both New York guys. Which one are you?
Well, I do live in New York now. I'm not from New York. I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area, so I am a Giants fan.
All right.
But of course, the Giants used to play in New York, so maybe that's part of what drew me back here.
All right. I guess I'm a Mets fan and there's not too many of us. So I'm always hoping to bring more people into the tribe, but San Francisco Giants, I'm good with that.
Yeah, well, hey, listen, if I had to choose between the New York teams, I'd absolutely choose the Mets. My husband loves the Mets. We love going to Citi Field.
Mhm.
I really think they're New York's team.
I appreciate you saying that. I wish they'd win a little bit more, but that'll happen one day. So let's talk about a little about Out of Left Field because you mentioned here you started writing it quite a while, or it came into your head quite a while ago. If you had just written it right away and not taken the time, would it have been the same book now as the one that came out, or do you think it would have been vastly different?
I think it would have been really different. I mean, at the very least, it would have been crappier from an artistic perspective
Mhm.
because The book I made before Out of Left Field is called Empire on Edge, and it's a historical fiction drama.
Mhm.
Took me 6 years to make. I ended up publishing it online because I it was ignored or rejected by every agent and publisher I pitched it to, which honestly was probably a good thing because it was a little rough in places. But spending so much time making that book and learning so much about storytelling, writing, practicing my drawing skills for many, many, many hours,
Mhm.
um, brought me to the point where I was, ready to craft something that was more professional and more high quality with Out of Left Field. And having worked in publishing too, informed that process quite a bit. Not only making the pitch process easier, I would say, because I understood how things work in publishing, but even just technical nitty-gritty stuff, like working with graphic novel designers every day at Scholastic, taught me about how to set up my files. And before I learned that, I mean, I was literally creating flat RGB JPEGs, and that was like how I did art. So my skills just moved forward leaps and bounds because of everything that I learned over the years,
Mhm.
and made Out of Left Field a much better product than it would have been had I started it right after high school. Even though the inspiration was definitely there, then I'm glad that I waited and improved a lot, so that the final product was more in line with, I guess, what I wanted to share and what my vision was.
I really enjoyed the book, and there's a bravery and an honesty that comes with writing a book about your own story. How long did it take you to say, you know what, I'm ready to put this story out there for the world to see?
Um, it wasn't really, I didn't really feel a lot of anxiety about sharing my story
Mhm.
necessarily. It was more that it took a while creatively to get it to a place that I wanted it to be. It started as full nonfiction, full memoir, and by the end it was semi-autobiographical biographical fiction. So a lot of it's exaggerated. I moved things around, I compressed things, I even made a few things up to try to capture the emotional heart of my high school experiences. And that, like any creative journey, was it took a while, and it's not something that could really be rushed. So I feel like the product that I have now is easier for others to connect to and relate to than it would have been had it been, pure nonfiction.
And with this book, how do you, when you're putting something together, from like you said, some of it is straight from your life, and some of the stuff that you sort of made a story with it as well. How do you sort of pick and choose what things you want to keep for yourself and what you want to put down on paper?
Really, it was, does this support what I'm trying to do with this book? That was what was in the forefront of my mind. I mean, that there were scenes and characters and aspects of earlier drafts of the story that I really liked because they were meaningful to me personally in my real life. For example, an earlier draft of the story had my younger brother in it. But as I worked on it and as I got some good editorial feedback and as I really zeroed in on what are the themes of this book? What is this trying to say? What is the message that I'm trying to put out there? Um, Anything that did not support that, I ended up discarding.
If could a book like this had come out when you were a young person, would it have changed a trajectory for you, or would it you have been the same trajectory that you're on right now?
I think, well, I don't know. I mean, I was such a nervous, socially anxious, insecure high schooler, as many high schoolers are.
Mhm.
So I don't know if I had seen representation like this, a story about a gay high school baseball player. I mean, I certainly would have been comforted by it. And I think that it would have informed my experience emotionally. I don't know if it would have actually emboldened me to, let's say, come out earlier than I did.
Right.
Um, I would have been happier had I come out earlier, and had I not cared so much about the fitting in on the baseball team and the approval of a certain kind of toxic dude on that team.
Right.
But I honestly don't know if high school me would have changed his behavior. But certainly I would have been comforted and I would have felt seen. And hopefully, at the very least, the teenagers today who read that book, even if they're not emboldened to do something different, they at least feel comforted. That would be a great outcome.
When you finished this book, did you change at all? Did you feel different from where you were when you first started writing?
Yeah, I feel like I finally got the high school story out because I made a few attempts actually to tell this story over the years. When I was in college, I took a fiction writing class and I wrote a short story based on my senior season of high school baseball. A couple years after that, I made a 10-page comic that covered similar ground. So I was really emotionally compelled to tell that story and to get it out, by the means of creating art. And it wasn't until I turned it into a longer form thing and brought in some of the coming of age stuff, some of the sexuality stuff,
Mm.
in addition to the baseball stuff, that I really felt like I had kind of completed that catharsis and done justice to, my emotions and my experiences in high school. So having made the book means I can move on in some ways. I'm not especially inspired to do like a sequel to Out of Left Field. I guess if there's a huge amount of audience demand, I'd consider it. But for now, I'm just really excited about doing something that's quite different, and that covers very different ground.
Which took longer, the text or the art?
Definitely the art. Oh my God, drawing is so time consuming. I mean, this book is 300 pages long.
Yes.
It took me a year to pencil the whole thing, which was honestly faster than I expected, um, given that it was almost twice as long as the first graphic novel I worked on. Um, and COVID lockdowns actually helped me quite a bit, because I penciled it in 2020 and 2021 when didn't have really anywhere to go. I was in my apartment. I was working from home. There wasn't a lot of visiting family or traveling or doing many hobbies. So it was just working my day job and drawing. That's basically all that I did.
Mhm.
Um, and then it took me over a year to ink everything. So um not just the time that I spent, but certainly like the number of hours that I spent was so much more for the drawing than for the writing, even though the writing took a while too, and it did go through many drafts and iterations.
Now, did you edit yourself on this book, or did you pass it off to someone else to get their opinion on it?
Yeah, I mean, several people had their hands on it. I mean, my husband is a phenomenal editor and was my first beta reader for a lot of the stuff. And then, I did have an editor at my publisher as well. And there were probably others that I consulted with along the way. It definitely was not a single person unadulterated vision. There was a lot of people's creative input on this, and it made it stronger, honestly.
When you're writing a book like this, you sort of have a beginning point and an end point. How do you sort of keep on target to say, okay, I want to get to here, but I also want to tell maybe some side stories as well to fill out the book a little more? How do you sort of control all that?
I mean, I do a lot of the creative work of the story in the earliest stages, I would say. Like by the time I get to drawing, I want to feel really confident about what I'm putting down on the page. So, the synopsis changed a lot, and went through a lot of different drafts. And then the script went through also a lot of drafts, fewer than the synopsis because by the time I felt confident enough about the synopsis to start writing the script, I wanted things to be at least somewhat set in stone. Things are always changing. The creative process is always evolving.
Mhm.
Nothing is done until you send it to the printer, basically. And then even then, you're like, oh, could it be better? And you start to second guess certain things. But um, yeah, I mean that's when it's kind of most fluid and fungible is in the synopsis phase. So by the time I was getting down with drawing, I was not really tempted to bring in new scenes or I mean there was editorial feedback where it was like, "Oh, you should lengthen this scene a little bit or give it a little bit more space, add a couple of spreads here," that was totally fine. But I wasn't tempted to bring in entirely new scenes, entirely new characters or plot lines at that point.
Would you be comfortable doing a book if someone came to you with their story and said, listen, I don't know how to write this book. If I tell you my story, could you write this for me? Would you be as comfortable doing that as you were telling your own story?
If I'm inspired enough by that person's story, I mean, I could see that happening. But the bar is pretty high because I have a lot of ideas myself, and
Mhm.
there's a lot of things that inspire me. And I generally don't have a problem with coming up with ideas or figuring out what I'm working on. So if someone came to me and I really liked the idea and like the timing worked out and the stars aligned, it's certainly something I would consider. It's not a flat no by any means, but
Right.
it's kind of hard for me to see a circumstance where all of that aligns in that way, and I'm not already working on something else of my own, you know?
Mhm. So the day the book comes out and you know it's going into people's hands and you know it's out for everyone to see, what's going through your mind on that day when it it stands?
Relief. I mean, I hustled so hard to promote this book. I my publisher did a lot too, and I was working with a really wonderful marketing and publicity person at my publisher, Andrews McMeel, who did a lot on behalf of the book. And I also worked with a freelance publicist who did a lot of work. But myself, I was reaching out to basically everyone I know. I was trying to get myself interviews and events. I was trying to, you know, every bizarre little context and circle that I was in, I made a little poster about the book to put up in like my yoga studio. Like who knows whether the people who do yoga are going to be into this book, but whatever, like it's available. So I'm gonna put a poster on that bulletin board. So I was just doing so much of that stuff. And honestly, it continued through April. The book came out at the end of March, and all of April was like hustling, hustling, hustling. I did a book tour in California. I was in the Bay Area and in Los Angeles, and that was a lot of fun. And I was very fortunate to get to do that. But it was like an interview or an event every single day, in addition to working my day job. And so it was just frantic, and I was really excited for it to come out, of course, but um, the sense of like, okay, we're approaching the finish line of the self-promotion engine was definitely relieving for me.
Yeah, it's funny because we've spoken to other folks who put out graphic novels, and I think us as fans think, okay, the book's out there, and it's just suddenly kind of gets a life of its own. But you guys are out there, it's either going to schools or bookstores, or like you said, interviews like that. And a lot of it you have to set up yourself to try to get word of mouth going, and it's sort of a 24/7 thing. And as you also said, you also have a 9 to 5 job, so it's
Right,
finding
right.
enough hours in the day to get it out there.
Yeah, and that's the reality of what we do. I mean, the number of cartoonists and authors of any kind really who make a living from that is so, so small. Um, and we do it because we love it, and not, not because it's lucrative.
Mhm.
Um, but the reality is like, yeah, in order to, I mean, there's so many things competing for people's time and energy and money, right? Like there's so much content out there. There's so many books, comics, movies, TV shows. And so rising above that crowd to some degree is very, very challenging.
Mhm.
Um, but for me, it was like, I mean, my motivation to self-promote was partially because it's just like what you have to do. It's a bit of an obligation, but it's also like, I wanted to make sure that I wanted to show my publisher that I could hustle like that, and to hopefully just sell enough books where they would make an investment in my next book. So that was really a driving force for me. It wasn't like, oh, I'm doing this because I expect to become rich or famous. Absolutely not. It was like, I just need to do this so that the book does well enough that they let me continue making books, and doing this thing that I love.
Are you finding more comic shops are open to bringing in graphic novels as opposed to, the Marvels and the DCs as images, or is it mainly bookstores that are sort of taking the load of that?
Um, Basically every comic shop that I visit these days has graphic novels. And many of them have manga as well because manga is huge right now. So I think that's great to see. I mean, I love the diversity of comics. I think that there is a place for all these kinds of comics, superhero floppies, graphic novels, manga, web comics, it's just great that so many people around the world of all ages are into this medium. And so, I think it's wonderful when comic shops offer more than just the traditional fare because I think it's a smart business decision and it's an inclusive move on their part too, from kind of a moral standpoint.
I was saying because the LGBTQ community with the graphic novels and comic books, like it's there now. It's part of comics. It is what it is. It's just this is our life now, and it's a wonderful thing. And how have you seen that sort of growth in comic shops and bookstores of these books coming out to people?
Yeah, I mean, it seems in some ways like, at least in the circles that I run in, like there are more queer cartoonists than not. Like the people who the people who are doing indie comics, self-published comics, and comics for large publishers like graphic novels are just, you know, uh, they're more queer on average than like the population, I would say. Like it's an overrepresented population within the ranks of comics creators.
Mhm.
Um, which I think is great. And honestly, like it's hard for me to imagine Out of Left Field being published even 10, 15 years ago. I just think the publishing landscape has changed so much, and publishers are so much more receptive to this kind of content and excited about publishing this kind of content. So that has been definitely a positive development for me personally, and something that I've been really excited to see because when I was in high school and I read Fun Home by Alison Bechdel and it, kind of changed my life, that was one of the only queer books really that I could find. I mean, there were others, of course, but to me, it felt like there were not a lot, and that was kind of a rare thing. And certainly within the world of graphic novels, it was a pretty rare thing. So now it's like there's a graphic novel with that shows every part of the queer spectrum, I mean, there's books about the trans experience and the non-binary experience, in addition to the gay and lesbian experience, the asexual experience.
Right.
A creator, Michelle Jing Chan, who I was fortunate enough to bid on her book as an editor at Scholastic. Her book is about an asexual person, and that experience being shown in the graphic novel space is pretty groundbreaking. So, and the fact that there were like enough publishers into that to like have an auction, it's a crazy, it's a really unusual, that's not the right word. It's a groundbreaking space that we're in now, and it's amazing to see this happen when it may have been hard to imagine a publishing environment and market like this just a few years ago.
And having books like this, is it helping younger people making hard conversations easier with parents, with friends to have something like this to be like, okay, let me, I can do this as well.
I hope so. Yeah. I mean, the up and coming talent in comics always kind of follows, I guess, the business trends or the cultural influences. Like, it may have been true that a few decades ago, people who get into comics as creators are trying to be superhero comics creators, right? Like that is kind of the dominant sort of comics that's out there. So people who want to do comics, they want to write and draw, Superman and Batman and Spider-Man and all that,
Right.
and those sorts of stories. And there, the manga boom of the early 2000s had a real impact on the beginning of the kids graphic novel boom. I mean, artists like Raina Telgemeier, whose book Smile essentially like created the middle grade kids graphic novel market. She was really into manga, and manga influenced her artwork, and many creators, that's part of their story. They got into manga, they started to draw in a way that was at least inspired by manga, and then their books get published.
Mhm.
and the kids graphic novel space blows up, and now all of a sudden you have kids who are going to art school who want to create specifically graphic novels for kids. And there's been another manga boom recently, so um, that is also feeding into the influence of the up and coming creators. So that's something that's really cool to see too, is like the layers of influence that keep happening.
I want to talk a little bit about your day job because, as you mentioned, you work at Scholastic for graphics. Um, what's absolutely incredible to me is that you guys are outselling Marvel, you're outselling DC, you're outselling Image. I mean, do you see them as, I hate to use the word competition, or do you just see that, okay, this is their space, this is our space, and we both, can share it together?
Yeah, I see it as a sharing thing, because these comics are for different audiences and they're usually sold in different ways. I mean, I did just mention, yes, graphic novels are available in many, if not most, comic shops, and that's great. But, for the most part, these books are getting sold through regular book channels. They're getting sold through Amazon, Barnes and Noble, indie bookstores, places where, well, I guess on Amazon you could probably find floppies, but you can't find floppies at Barnes and Noble or indie bookstores. So for the most part, it's different channels and it's different audiences. And I actually think it's kind of scratching the same itch in society. Like in, the 50s and 60s, comics were mostly for kids. Like the biggest readership for these golden and silver age comics was kids, like mostly boys under the age of 13. And now, 8 to 12 is the middle grade range that we use in the publishing space. And that is still the biggest, like the driving age group in graphic novel sales. And that is like the bread and butter of Scholastic's dominant market share is, comics for kids between the ages of, let's say 7 to 12. Um, so I mean, I know Marvel and DC are trying to publish more kids content, and one thing that Marvel has done specifically is license books to us at Scholastic. So Scholastic Graphics publishes graphic novels about Marvel characters, and those tend to do really well. So maybe that's the answer right there. But I don't know. I mean, there should be comics for everyone. I love that there is a proliferation of content for every age group, but um, it's been true for decades now that like kids are the most popular sort of group and the largest readership for comics. And whether those comics are being published by Marvel and DC or by Scholastic, the kids are just reading them in droves.
Now, as an editor, I always find this question really awesome to hear from you guys. When you're writing for children, you don't want to go above their heads because then maybe they'll lose interest, but you don't want to speak down to them because they'll be like, you know what, you don't treat me this way. How do you find that medium in writing that you sort of that kids can relate to?
Yeah, I mean that's a tricky question because it's there's not like a secret to it. I mean, so I work in my day job with Dave Pilkey, who is like not only the best-selling graphic novelist for kids, but like one of the best-selling authors, period, of any author, any book, any age group. And I think that he has done an incredible job of like preserving the kid voice and kid sensibility in his work. I mean, this is a man who is almost 60 years old and has been publishing books for kids for decades, but he still has this like youthful exuberance and humor and silliness, but also depth that is, that connects with kids' experiences. And I know this not only because of his sales numbers, which are tremendous, but because, I get letters all the time at the Scholastic office from kids to Dave Pilkey, where the kids are so inspired by his stories and from parents too, who say like, this book taught my kid to process grief or, the divorce or moving to a new city or starting a new school. Like these kids have upsetting and traumatic experiences too, of course. And part of what Dave's books do so brilliantly is they're not only really entertaining and addictively readable, and they bring in kids who aren't interested in reading all the time, but they have this emotional depth to them and they make kids feel seen. So I think that's a really special thing that he achieves, and it's very hard to do. And then from my perspective, writing books, I have not tried to write for younger than a teenage audience yet. But for a teenage audience, I really was just like, let me try to make this as realistic as possible. You know, uh, I wanted to show at least what my memory of high school was really like. So my book has swearing, it has implied sex, it has drinking, it has, kind of upsetting adult things happen sometimes because that is what really happens to teens.
Mhm.
And I hope that being honest about that will allow readers to connect to something more easily and feel more seen. So I guess that's my best answer is like, it's a rare gift to be able to connect with a kid on a kid level when you're not a kid anymore. But the best shot that you have, I think, is just like trying to remember what you were like at that age. What were you into? What was your sensibility? And just try to conjure that as much as you can.
I just want to name drop Jamar Nicholas because he's a good friend of the show, and you work with him as well too, and he puts out amazing, amazing books too. But you were talking about Dave Pilkey, and like you said, this is like the king of kids' graphic novels. When you're editing his stuff, is it ever a little nerve-wracking? Like, this guy's good at what he does, but I do think maybe we can make some changes here.
Yeah, I mean, I'm an associate editor. My boss, Ken Geist, is a VP publisher at large, and he's Dave's editor of record. So he tends to have more of the tough conversations with Dave than I do. But Dave is like, he's so good at what he does. He's such a genius, honestly. Like he doesn't need much editing. Like he really knows what he's doing. And so my job a lot of the time, in my position is to kind of just move his books towards publication. I mean, we publish two graphic novels by Dave every year. So Dave himself is drawing like 500 pages of comics a year, which is just nuts. But the production schedule and the printing schedule for these books is also nuts. And it's like just making sure that the files are like ready to go on time and in color and have been proofread, like all of that stuff. That's the majority of what I do, I guess, as an editor on Dave's team.
Could you see yourself doing a book for younger readers, or are you comfortable in the teen genre?
I could definitely see myself doing a book for young readers. I mean, I'll be honest, it would probably be more lucrative than doing it for teens. So it's something at some point I want to try. Yeah, I mean it's really whatever I'm inspired to do, I do. Like the first graphic novel I made, the historical fiction one, I don't even know if I was thinking about an audience of any kind. Like people told me, oh, this would be great for kids in the classroom to learn about history. And I don't know if I fully agree with that, but I wasn't thinking with kids in mind or with adults in mind necessarily. I was just thinking, this is a book that I'm inspired to make and I want to make it. Now, working in publishing means I always have to think about the audience, or I'm so much more conscious of it. And out of left field, as I mentioned, was something I was inspired to do for many years. And it just happens to align really well with YA because it is a story about a teenager starring teenagers. So that kind of fell into place in a nice way, but in almost a coincidental way. So, but yeah, absolutely down the line, I could see myself doing something for middle graders, especially because I've learned so much about that age group by working at Scholastic and by working with people like Jamar, who's one of my favorite creators and one of my favorite authors to work with. Working on at this point, we're working on his third Leon graphic novel.
Mhm.
So working with Jamar for so many years for books for that age group has just taught me even more about what do kids that age want. And Jamar is another creator who does a great job of like putting himself back in his kid shoes and thinking, what was my experience like when I was 10 or 11 years old, and trying to capture that in the book.
Can you see yourself maybe in a couple of years going back to that first graphic novel with the knowledge you have now with Out of Left Field and say, okay, here's some tweaks I can make to this and maybe bring it back, or do you just want to leave that as it is, as like a learning book, and then kind of go from there?
Yeah, I would say mostly the latter, although I remain very interested in history, always have been. And I do think that if I started that book over today, it would be better in every way. So I'm not going to redo that book exactly, but I could, I could definitely see myself doing another historical fiction thing, perhaps even set in the same time period of the early 19th century, because I'm obsessed with that time period of history for whatever reason. Like I could see myself returning there, but creating a different story with different characters. And again, I'm sure it would be so much better.
I was gonna say is, I mean, it's I love what I love this, and it's the nerdy part of me too. Like in this book, where in the very beginning, you kind of that board game about history, and and I was like, that's actually a really kind of cool idea. And when I see the kids smack it off, I'm like, idiots! Like it's little things like that. What is it about history that has enthralls you so much?
Another hard question. I mean, I've been into it since I was like a little kid, like as long as I can remember. Like I used to dress up like a Revolutionary War soldier when I was like 5 years old, like powdered wig and all. Um, I don't know. I guess I love to imagine what the past was like and try to put myself back in that time.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know. Something about it is just like aesthetically pleasing to me, and I guess mostly it's just cool to imagine being in a different time and place and realizing, as different as that time was, like people are people throughout history, and that the people that you read about were just humans like the rest of us. And, if they walked onto the subway platform or something and you saw, Napoleon, but he's dressed in 21st century clothing and he just like gets on the Q train, like he would just look like a man, like any other man. And I don't know, that's kind of funny to think about. Like they're just people, even though by becoming famous through history, they've been kind of mythologized. They were just humans like the rest of us.
Right. You working in the industry you work in, how do we as parents battle YouTube and the phones and the iPads and try? I mean, my daughter loves graphic novels. My son is a huge Dogman fan. He has a Spider-Man posters all over his wall and one Dogman poster that he had to put up. But
Nice.
how do we kind of keep that road going for reading and literacy when there's so much else out there that compete?
Yeah. Yeah, it's super, super hard. I mean, I extend every compliment and every sympathy to you as a parent for fighting those battles, because it's so hard. And I was just talking with some colleagues the other day, and they're like, "Man, I'm so glad I'm a parent in this age of like iPads, where if my kid's having a tantrum, I could just hand him an iPad." And I was thinking to myself, like, great, but also not great. When I was a kid, my mom was really strict about screen time, and would set a timer and be like 30 minutes on the computer. When the timer goes off, you have to go outside, or you have to draw, or you have to build with Legos, or occupy yourself in some other way. And as much as I disliked that as a kid, I think as an adult I really, really appreciate it, because I learned how to be creative and how to occupy myself, and honestly spent a lot of time practicing my writing and drawing as a kid, because I enjoyed it, and it was an activity that I could do for as long as I wanted.
Right.
Um, so it just gets harder and harder. The more screens that are out there, the more it's pretty impossible to control the internet and to keep kids away from certain content. Um, so I don't know. I don't know if I have a good answer beyond just keep giving them content that they like, and acknowledge that reading is reading. And
Mhm.
if your kid just wants to read graphic novels, that's great. Like give them as many graphic novels as they want. And kids change over the years, and a kid who becomes addicted to reading through graphic novels might end up reading other books later, and might build that lifelong interest in reading and those habits. and associating reading with like a with fun, because when they were a kid, they read something they really liked, something that was fun. If they grow up with that association and those habits, they're much more likely to continue reading throughout adult life.
Uh, I just also wanted to ask you that when you finished this book, do you have another book already in mind? And how long of a break do you give yourself before starting that?
Yes, I do have another book in mind. I have started to write it already. It is another YA graphic novel. It's starring two kids who are navigating college admissions,
Okay.
which is an increasingly crazy process, an
Mhm.
increasingly high pressure environment. Something that I've been fascinated by for a long time. I'm relishing writing like crazy entitled parents. That's been a lot of fun for me. But I also think it's a good vessel to cover similar thematic ground to Out of Left Field. It's about teenagers who are figuring out who they are and what they want to do with their lives. They're coping with external pressure and sort of the journey towards the self. So it made sense for me sort of from a career perspective to stick with the YA space.
Mhm.
Um, and it was just, what I happen to be inspired to make right now. So that's what I'm currently writing. It's going to be, several years before that comes out because drawing takes so long. And what the break that I gave myself? Well, I finished inking Out of Left Field in March of 2023. And over the next 6, 7 months, I didn't do any drawing. I was enjoying the spring and the summer. I was reviewing the color pages that my publisher was sending my way. So there was still bookmaking stuff occurring for Out of Left Field at that time. Um, but I was not actively creating myself. And then from there, it moved into like the book promotion cycle. Um, and that was really what was occupying my time. So here I am now, finally having gotten through, I guess, the most intense part of the book promotion cycle, and able to return to my creative practice. So it was nice to have a break, but it's also very nice to be back because it's the sort of thing that if I'm not creating, if I'm not working on something, I feel very incomplete.
Did you ever see anyone else doing the art on your projects, or is it you need that to go with the story?
I could see it. I could see it. Again, not something I'm opposed to. It would have to be the right circumstances, but I do feel very fortunate to be able to draw because I know a lot of creators who are writers only, and who have to go and find an artist, and or pay an artist, or they have more of an uphill battle submitting to publishers because I think publishers, Scholastic included, like if we get a graphic novel script that's just a script, it has to really blow our socks off for us to kind of, um, I mean, one, like do the labor of actually finding an artist, but to convince sales and marketing and the people who make decisions at a publisher, like it's relatively easy for an editor to imagine what something could be because that's kind of our whole job. But someone who's not an editor presenting them with a script and saying, "Oh, but this is going to be an illustrated graphic novel," it takes a little bit more work to convince them what that would look like and to show them that vision. Um, so I would encourage people who think they can't draw to give it a try and to improve because I'm a big believer in improvement is possible with dedication, discipline, conscious learning. Like I got so much better as an artist by practicing a lot, and by taking a couple of continuing education classes at the School of Visual Arts here in New York. Both of those classes, I mean, those were like one semester, 10 sessions, so not a ton of time, but my drawing skills just rocketed forward with what I learned in those classes. So I think if you're someone who wants to make comics and you can draw even a little bit, you can dedicate yourself to getting better. And to me, the most important thing is the storytelling. It's not the art, it's not the writing, it's like the combination. It's are you telling a good story, an absorbing story, and we've also seen so many examples of many different art styles getting published and working perfectly well, depending on how good the storytelling is and how well the art works with the words to achieve that.
You mentioned before, you guys get scripts sent to you. What is it exactly that you're looking for that says, okay, this catches my eye. This might be something that we can grow into a book. And what are things that you're just like, oh, this is just another Dogman knockoff?
I mean, with scripts specifically, well, there's again, no one clear answer here. Like we are looking for things that are similar to what we do, but also different from what we do, which is so frustrating, I'm sure, for anyone who's listening to this thinking, how can I get published by Scholastic? Like it has to be something that fits into the sort of book that we already know we can publish, right? Graphic novels for kids, especially for middle graders. And you can look at Scholastic's list and see what we've successfully published. But if it's too similar to what we've published, then it's also like, oh, well, we already have this, right? So it has to be different enough. And again, I know that that's frustrating and contradictory, but um, it's really just like a feeling thing. It's like, is this good? Do I like this? Can I see this succeeding? Does the rest of the team agree that this can succeed? Um, and yeah, with scripts specifically, it's got to show it, it's got to demonstrate like an understanding of the comics medium specifically. Like there are so many scripts that are way too text heavy that are essentially just like a caption box and an illustration, and every panel is like that. And there's like six speech balloons in a panel, and it's like, how are you even going to fit all of these, let alone arrange them in a way that is clearly legible? So people who really understand comics as a medium and the specific rules of it and the need to do most of the storytelling visually, those are the scripts that are more successful generally than the people who are like, I'm going to try to write a graphic novel because it's trendy or because I like them, but I'm not going to, people who pretty clearly, in my opinion, need to study a bit longer, work a bit harder. I'm not saying these people have no talent or will never get published, not by any means. I'm just saying like you might need to work a little bit to hone your writing style and specialize your writing style a bit more for comics,
Mhm.
before you'll be ready to really write a graphic novel.
We see such a rise now of independent books, with the Kickstarters and things like that. Could you see yourself doing a comic where, you stretch out a story over a few issues, or do you like the graphic novels where this is where I begin and this is where I end, and this is one story, and then I'll move on to something else?
Right now, I am just compelled to create these long stories that are like, this is a book. But the historical fiction thing that I did, I ended up publishing as a web comic on my website. I released, a chunk of it each week for maybe a year or so. And I did that partially because I was not able to find a print publisher, and partially because I just wanted to like try that out. But it was not it was not the ideal manner of presenting this book. It was always intended to be like, here's a page, it's next to another page, you turn the page. Um, so if I did do something serial, I would want to be more conscious about like optimizing the format for however it's going to be published from the start. So um yeah, something I could see in the future for sure. I don't know what the future will bring. But for now I am motivated to do another, possibly gigantic graphic novel that is meant to be like a print book. That's what I'm actively pursuing. And when that's wrapping up, we'll see where the inspiration takes me and what I'm compelled to do.
I'm just also going to ask now because I never get to do it on the show. A couple of baseball questions. First off, I'm going to give you three names because you're a San Francisco Giants fan. You tell me if they belong in the Hall of Fame or not. Jeff Kent,
Yeah, I think so.
Buster Posey,
Yes.
Barry Bonds.
Oh, that's the easiest one, absolutely.
And I'm with
Okay.
you with that.
Yeah, I think that the Hall of Fame should be a baseball history museum, and the best players from each era should be in there. I mean, what the thing that I keep going back to with guys like Barry Bonds, Roger Clemens, Alex Rodriguez, like these whether either admitted or, fairly certain to be performance enhancing drug users is like they were competing against other performance enhancing drug users, right? Like this was an era where many players were doing this. We as baseball consumers are not going to know the
Mhm.
full extent of who did what and when and for how long and what drug did they use and blah blah blah, right? So it's fine to me if you have a room in the museum that's like this is the steroid era and this is where we're going to highlight those guys. But Barry Bonds was an incredible hitter and one of the greatest hitters of all time. I mean, in my opinion, PEDs are not like his on base percentage, his obviously the home runs, but just his how feared he was as a hitter and all the intentional walks that he drew and just he was on another level at the plate and so far ahead of basically every other hitter of that era, including many PED users, that it feels like a no-brainer to me. Um, and Buster Posey, I think, um, less of a clear-cut case, but the three World Series titles, the Rookie of the Year, the MVP, the the leadership on the dynasty of the early, of the 2010s, um, I think means a lot. And the fact that he was a catcher as well. I mean, we just saw Joe Mauer get into the Hall of Fame,
So,
and catchers tend to play. They tend to have shorter careers. They really get beat up back there.
mhm,
And so I think the threshold for sort of the compiled numbers
mhm.
is and should be lower for catchers because of the difficulty of the position that they play.
See, the only difference I make is for me, if you fail the drug test and you knew it was you shouldn't do it, like A-Rod, Manning, stuff like that, that's where I push you out. But for Bonds, baseball went after him. The United States government went after him, and they couldn't find anything. They had suspicions, but there was no, smoking gun. So if you're just
Right.
going on suspicions, you can't keep someone out because you got a good feeling that might have happened. The numbers are the numbers, and if you don't want to put him in with nothing on his hat, that's fine. I think do the same thing with Pete Rose. Put a
Hmm.
plaque in. Don't put a Cincinnati Reds on there. Maybe put on the bottom about it, but right now, I can't watch MLB Network without three things coming up every 2 seconds about what I should bet on and this and that. And I'm like, oh, come on.
Oh, I know, I know. It's yeah, the messaging is yeah, it's so easy to poke holes in it and to see, the level of hypocrisy there. Um, and I don't know. I mean, it's like again, it comes back to me to those two things. And I think your stance is super valid, first of all. The admission slash hard evidence, I think that's a reasonable line to draw. I'm not going to quibble with you there. But again, for me, it just comes back to the best players should be in the Hall of Fame, and the Hall of Fame's main purpose should be a museum of baseball history. It should not be like we are judging the characters of these people. Because the other thing is like players who are in the Hall of Fame, they weren't all perfect exemplars of humanity and ethics, right? Like there are some real jerks who played baseball and, they were jerks, but they didn't do performance enhancing drugs or they didn't gamble on baseball, but they did other bad things. But those bad things that they did are not on the specific list of bad behaviors that the Baseball Writers Association of America has decided are not worthy. Um, I don't know. It just yeah, I would love to see the rules change at some point and all of the players from that era get another shot at getting in because they really were amazing and um they have numbers and careers that are very much stand up
Mhm.
to the numbers and careers of other people in that space.
Wholeheartedly agree. Well, with the baseball pun, you did hit a home run with this book. This is a phenomenal book out there. And where can fans find you? Where can fans keep up and see what you've been up to?
Yeah, my website, jonahnewmancomics.com is probably the best spot. My social media links are available through there. I have a page with upcoming events. I have all of my media interviews, reviews, etc. linked through there. So that's probably the best place to start. I do also have an email list. I don't send out a ton of emails, but that's linked through my website too. If you want to stay up to date with me via email, that's another means of doing it.
And we are back. Yeah, I mean, he talks about how he did that initial project, historical graphic novel, and that he wasn't too, it was sort of up and down with that. But this was sort of, where he kind of came into his own as a writer, as an artist, and the time it takes to do all that. And he really did a fantastic job with this book. I think it's going to help a lot of young people out there. And we're so pleased that Jonah was on with us to talk about that. And we both pretty much agreed with a lot of the Hall of Famers that we think should be in the Hall of Fame. I'm going to keep pushing for Lance Parrish, man. You know, take a look at his numbers if you're a baseball fan. That's all I'm going to say. So, Jonah, thank you again. Guys, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Remember, rate, review, subscribe, and we will see you next week.